Yep.
Okay, great. My name is Stephen Feast, and I'm the chair of the Community Liaison Committee. And I was going to start on time and end on time, so we got the hall until 9 o'clock. And the big thing that I want to make sure everybody understands is tonight our goal is to hear from as many people as possible. Therefore, we'd like to ask everyone to keep your questions and comments to no more than 5 minutes. And members of the public will be allowed to speak a second time only when everybody else has had their turn. And what you would do is line up behind that microphone there when it comes to the questions and comments from the public. The other thing is I would ask that all comments and questions be directed to the chair, myself, just so that we can make sure that the meeting carries on in an orderly fashion. I also ask that everybody be respectful to each other and refrain from voicing their views while others are speaking or after they have spoken. I would also ask that everybody wear their mask throughout this whole meeting. I know it's a pain, but that's the sign of the times that we're on right now. And I also ask if you could please put your phones on mute. I guess one of the things that I just want to do first is kind of quickly go over the committee members. As I mentioned, my name is Stephen Feast, I'm the chair. The co-chair is Sean Day, and the rest of the committee is over here: David Garbury, Hughie Stewart, Holy McCarran, Archie McKenzie, Mark Chenoweth, Jim DeRocas, Roger Porter, Paul Musa, 𝐿𝐴𝐧𝐿, and Ryan Smith. Now, one of the things I just want to quickly go over is what is the purpose of the 𝐶LC? Now, we're an advisory committee, and we advertise widely throughout the area, trying to get as many participants on the committee so that we have a wide area of expertise and views on this whole operation. But I do want to make sure that people are aware the 𝐶LC does not have a role in the actual application for the oyster farm with the government. What our role is to provide
That got us to this point. And we took this revised plan into a broader range of the community to get more feedback, factored that feedback in again, made more revisions and improvements to get to this point, where then we were dealing with reaching out to specific stakeholder groups like oyster harvesters licensed to operate in the harbor, recreational boaters, recreational fishers, and so on, to get more feedback, allow us to refine the plan even more, which got us to this stage, which is the final version of the plan that was submitted with our application. Right-sizing the farm was an important exercise. We learned that the total area of the harbor is 4,400 acres. Our farm design is 90.3 acres. So that means the farm would occupy 2% of the harbor. We believe this is an operation that would be small enough to exist in harmony with other activities in the harbor, and means also that 98% of the harbor would be fully available for other users. We also believe that this size of farm will be large enough to provide full-time employment for most of the staff and large enough to be economically sustainable. Mitigation of concerns, another important component of the application process. As we went around the community and talked to hundreds of people, some of the concerns raised were more common. Visual profile was one of them, and we put a lot of effort into mitigating that concern by, first of all, selecting very deliberately lease sites that are distant from homes and distant from views, and also by committing to use our bobber growth system, which drastically reduces the height of the equipment out of the water and thereby has a very significant impact on mitigating the visual profile concern. Potential impact on eelgrass was another common concern. We learned about that very early on and took it seriously, and we were fortunate to be able to have Dr. Jeffrey Barrell, an eelgrass specialist with Fisheries and Oceans Canada. He came to site, did an informal survey of the 3 proposed lease areas, and came back with some equipment another time and did a formal survey and provided his opinion as an expert in the field that the proposed operation of suspended oyster aquaculture is appropriate on these sites with respect to any potential impact on eelgrass. This did, okay, came back on. Also, we researched and studied dozens of peer-reviewed articles on the subject of the interaction between suspended oyster aquaculture and eelgrass. We now understand that science, and these articles and the scientists we've engaged with support the notion that there's a growing body of evidence indicating there's actually beneficial synergies that exist between floating aquaculture and eelgrass. Furthermore, we've engaged with St. and we're lucky to have them agree to do baseline studies of these 3 proposed lease areas to determine the existing conditions before any farm is built. And if approved, the plan is that will be ongoing year after year to determine the actual impacts of the farm, positive or negative. Farm layout and location, I've already discussed the various mitigation measures we've applied there. This is a short video that shows, I think, quite graphically the difference in visual profile between the commonly used technology in the industry and the bobber growth system that we are going to use if approved. In the foreground, you see 4 of the commonly used oyster grow cages. They're currently in grow mode, which means the cage part is down and floats are up. When they're flipped over to defoul, they're twice as high as you saw in that photo. If you look closely, you'll see there are hundreds of bobber growth units. And if they're hard to see, I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot of them there. So what this demonstrates is that our measures to mitigate the visual profile are real and effective. And so hundreds there, 4 of the other in the foreground, significant difference. This is a photograph looking vertically down into one of the baskets in our land-based nursery, and you're looking at baby oysters happily growing and filtering the phytoplankton out of the water that's passing by them. These oysters today are living on Philip Docker's farm in Merrimack Harbor, and in a couple of years they'll be ready to go to market. Response to known concerns. Another important thing. When the CLC was formed, one of their early tasks they took on was to determine the known concerns at that time. And they compiled a list provided the list to us and asked us to write responses to each of those concerns. We did that, and those responses are for public use on the CLC website. 3 concerns have been circulating since we did that, and they all relate to our application for the land-based nursery. They are harbor width, where we had a statement in our application that was just a general statement about the siting of the nursery. We said the harbor was a kilometer wide there, which is a true statement. If you stand at that site and look across the harbor, depending which direction you look, in one direction the harbor is 1.8 kilometers wide, in another it's just under half a kilometer wide, and in the other direction it's 1.3 kilometers wide. If you average those 3 numbers, it's 1.2 kilometers. Nursery supply pipes. There's been an issue raised about the number of pipes serving the nursery. When we put our application in, there were general arrangement drawings that showed 2 pipes. It was built with 3 pipes. The government is very well aware of that difference. And what's important here is to know that the physical parameters of the facility that are critical to its operation and important ecologically have not changed. And they are the location, the footprint, the maximum mass of oysters in the facility, and the maximum flow rate through it. Those are unchanged. Nursery permits. This issue arose a year ago, about a year and a half ago, and it has been explained several times. What happened was when we applied for the nursery permit and were granted approval to build it, the government told us no other permits were necessary. We went ahead and built it with that knowledge, only to find out later that that statement wasn't true. It was an honest mistake by government staff. 3 departments of the government investigated that situation and found no wrongdoing by Town Point Oysters or myself, no intent to avoid permits. We haven't been required to modify anything or to cease operations. This issue has been totally dealt with, and I hope I don't have to explain this another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Porter. Now we'll ask David Garvey to give his review on the St. study.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm wearing 3 hats. The first one is a personal one. As a member of the community, and 2 years ago, if anyone had asked me, was I in favor of having an oyster farm in Antigonish Harbour, I'd have said, no, I don't want an oyster farm in Antigonish Harbour. I don't want a fish farm. I don't want a mussel farm. I don't want major industry. And as a sort of vegetarian in a vegan household, I'm against meat of any kind. And I suspect that won't cut any water with most of you. Secondly, as a biologist, I spent the last 35 years studying the ecology of Antigonish Harbour, Tracadie Harbour, and a series of estuaries in this part of Nova Scotia. And I am deeply concerned about the state of that environment, the state of the eelgrass, the state of the biodiversity. And, sorry, that was my second hat. And as a third hat, I'm currently the coordinator of aquatic resources, an interdisciplinary program at St. FX. And the nature of that program is to look at issues regarding water from essentially a multi-dimensional perspective that includes the biology, the policy issues, management issues, economic issues, cultural issues, First Nations issues, and so on. And so as wearing all three of those hats, I agreed to initiate a long-term research study of Antigonish Harbor from the perspective of what is the potential impact of having a major growing oyster farm in the harbor. Now, we've only been at this a few months, and it's very difficult to come to long-term conclusions based on a few months of work with only a couple of undergraduate students. And while the undergraduate students, stand up, Kaylin and Annie, have been working really hard all summer, one part of the study that they've been doing is actually verifying, do the oysters that they grow in these things, do they actually grow better in these things than they do in traditional oyster cultivation systems? So there's a question that we are asking, and we have the first set of data completely in. Unfortunately, you need a second set of data to determine, have they actually grown? And we're about to gather those data now, and hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll be able to tell Mr. Porter and Philip Docker whether or not the oysters that they grow in this system are actually growing faster than they are in traditional oyster grow facilities. So there's a purely sort of technological problem that clearly is of interest to oyster farmers and anyone who wishes to market a new technology. So that part of the study is really just beginning, and we don't have any numbers yet. I can't bedazzle you with graphs and figures and so on. So the second part of what we did this summer was actually look at eelgrass systems in Antigonish Harbor, and we looked at equivalent, this is now before any oyster aquaculture has been initiated in Antigonish, and we looked at eelgrass systems in Miragamish Harbor in and adjacent to an intensive oyster growing facility that has been there for over 20 years. So what did we find? So the first thing is that the places where in Antigonish Harbor, where Town Point Oysters is actually proposing to put his farm, there's virtually no eelgrass. We went down, we sent swimmers down, we made cores of the sediment. In those places, we confirmed, the DFO scientists, there's no eelgrass, virtually nothing. And when you go to other places in the harbor, there are major signs of eutrophication. The eelgrass has an awful lot of microalgae growing on it. There's signs of fungal contamination. This is not a pristine harbor system that we all like to think it is. It has problems. Okay? Our sewage treatment facility is overloaded. Our farms that are along the banks of the harbor are putting in effluent from the farm animals. In the watershed, all forestry and agriculture is putting in nutrients and so on into that system. It's not a pristine system. And we think, based on our observations, that the eelgrass in the harbor, there's still lots of it there. A lot of it is healthy, but a lot of it is not so healthy. And we think, following the example of New York City, I'm sure you've heard of New York City, they have now input hundreds of millions of oysters to form reefs outside of the city to do what? To clean up the water. Clean up the water. And there's no reason to suspect that the few million oysters that Town Point Oysters is attempting to grow in Antigonish Harbor won't have the same effect. It won't, likely not to hurt. The key observation that we made in Miragamish Harbor was that inside this intensive oyster farm facility, there was eelgrass. It wasn't the healthiest in the world, but it was there. 20 years of intensive aquaculture has not destroyed that system. And as soon as you move 50 meters away, 100 meters away, extremely lush beds of eelgrass. And Miragamish Harbor isn't that much different from Antigonish Harbor and Tracadie Harbor, Pumpkin Harbor, and so on. There's absolutely no reason on a priori grounds to suggest that oyster farming in Antigonish Harbor is going to have a major detrimental effect on the eelgrass or any of the rest of the biota in that system. So, this work that we're doing is really only just been initiated, and we were hoping to do a long-term study. And the funders, or the initial set of funders we approached, how am I doing? 2 minutes, good. The initial set of funders that we approached said, we're not interested in giving you money. It's already been, it's well known. Oyster farming is essentially benign. Now, if you were growing mussels or you were growing finfish of any kind, there is real concern there. Anyway, we're still hoping to get some funding for a long-term study because we think it's needed, if only to be able to say, one way or the other, that oyster farming, at least in this system, is a relatively benign agricultural practice. Now, we did have some funding, for which I'm very grateful. The biology department gave us a few $1,000s to support the salary of a student. We had another student who was supported by an NSERC undergraduate scholarship. And IRAP, federal industry support, gave us a few $1,000s, for which I'm really grateful. And I'm hoping that in the future, that we can get greater funding to support a larger research program that will answer any remaining questions that people might have about the interactions between oysters and the surrounding biological community. So I'm going to stop there and hand the microphone over. Thank you.
Now we have a presentation. Sorry, where are we here?
Which one do you want first?
Sorry, who's giving the presentation?
Lou and I are.
Oh, okay. If you want to get to the podium, that's
Which one do you
fine.
want first?
Which one?
What's that?
What presentation do you want first?
Friends of Antigonish Harbor.
This one?
Good.
That one?
That has about
The other one's got a
6
different,
pages.
front screen.
Yeah, that's
The other
right.
one only has 3.
Along.
This one, I think the two people, Pat and Mike, I believe they never got a response as to whether they would be permitted to present. So there must have been some confusion. They were waiting for confirmation that they could permit. Then we got a confirmation, say the
Yeah.
full presentation was okay.
Yeah.
So
Peter,
I don't think Mike
I'm
can.
sitting right there.
Yeah.
You want to?
You were allowed to.
Well, after this presentation, you can come up and do that one as well. Okay?
Okay.
Give them the microphone.
Should be on.
Switch on the side.
Yes.
We are going to have just free presentation on behalf of Friends of Huntington Harbor. It's basically the same presentation Mike McDonald and I had to do both councils, county council and town council. It was kind of difficult for us to decide to participate in this presentation because somehow we don't really believe that we are going to change too many minds or hearts on this project. As David said, he changed his mind. We had different head 2 years ago. Well, I still have the same head as I had 2 years ago today. I would like to point out that we are looking at this proposal with much more complexity than just science. As David said, science is pretty clear. Most of our success are scientifically approved. Question is location. Our problem is the history of protecting this harbor. If you look at it, I had to mention a few months ago, it was the, excuse me, my voice is going. It was the first nation who first protected the harbor. And because when settlers came in, the harbor was functioning. There were oysters in there, they were calling Indian oyster pots, and it worked. Everything was there. Now, town made certain progress with it. Water treatment facility, county was involved. Farmers improved. It may not be ideal, as David says, but nevertheless, there's improvement in protection of the harbor. Protection of the bottom part of the harbor is the landing. It's wildlife sanctuary initiated by biology department in Seymour. There are protected beaches, Dunn's Beach and Mahoney's Beach. It was done by government in the 80s. And not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago, it was the established association called Antigonish Harbor Watershed Association. It was in response to development which was, I don't want to call it unscrupulous, but it was risky because there was a proponent who was trying to maximize profit for himself and actually pump septic residue into the harbor. There were scientists who actually said at the time that sometimes this is okay. It was the Watershed Association became community association. There were some people from biology department. I was the first chair of it. We tried to protect the harbor that way. Now it's Friends of Antigonish Harbor. The last thing I will say about us that we feel that sometimes we had a really unfair treatment. We were called NIMBYs. We were called come from the way. Well, we are all different kinds of people around there. There's lots of, there's over 50 houses just on my side of the harbor. I have built my house there almost 50 years ago. And we are local people who are concerned with complexity of protecting the harbor's integrity.
Hello, for those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Peter Bowler. I first came to 𝐻𝐭𝐫𝐻 in 1973 to attend 𝐻𝐭𝐫, and enjoyed 𝐻𝐭𝐫. Since then, I traveled frequently to 𝐻𝐭𝐫 in the 2004 to 10 period, when I served on the board of governors of 𝐻𝐭𝐫, and during that period, I bought a piece of land and built a home here, and my wife and I want to spend as much time as we can during the summer and fall. And I'm involved in the Friends of 𝐻𝐭𝐫. one of the things that concerns us is the sheer volume of equipment which will be in the harbor if the plan moves forward. 23,000 acres, 440 anchors, as we understand the plan based on looking at the application. Lots of fact collectors, 52 kilometers of ropes and cables, strings, speeding together. It's located, as Mr. Porter indicated, in shallow sections of the harbor with depths ranging from 1 feet to 6 feet or so. There is ice cover in these sections of the harbor. And the literature that we have read, and we're not experts, we don't propose to be scientists, we're not agriculture experts, but we are concerned about the well-being of the harbor. The literature indicates that the depth requirement, especially in areas that have ice cover, should be substantially greater than the depths that are indicated. The other thing that is troubling to us is these lease applications are for a 10-year period, and they're almost always renewed by the Department of Fisheries and Agriculture, as are applications to transfer the licenses, to sell the licenses once they have been awarded. So it is a long-term, once a decision is the plan is approved, the reality will be that large volumes of equipment will be in this harbor for a very long time. And this is just a quick map that the reason to show this area over here. This channel was a personal navigational channel filed by Pat McDonald to ensure that sailors and boaters in that originating in that part of the harbor had a way to get to the channel to make their way out to the cut and the bay. And as you can see, there's a conflict there on one of the large lease areas. The other map that we wanted to show briefly was a map from the Nova Scotia Department of the Environment, and it shows the protected beach areas and the protected water areas adjacent to those beaches.
We have a few concerns. I'm not going to actually mention them all, but as Peter said, one of depth of the harbor is concerned to us. The lobster fishing while the harbor on the south side of the harbor, they do not support application for this oyster farm. Safety of navigation for lobster fishermen and for us as users of the harbor can be jeopardized. There are always potential environmental threats to birds, fish, plants, and so on. It's not the oyster that is the threat, it's the human activity in infrastructure which involved this proposal. Then coming to the point of industrialization of residential and recreation area. There's lots of people who bought the land there, built the houses, and suddenly it's industrialized that part of the harbor. All of us talked about the oysters, biology, this and that, but none of you mentioned infrastructure, and it's part of the duty of CLC to be concerned, and I quote from the guidelines, be concerned with infrastructure which leads to application of this project. So we have to be concerned what will have to be done in that residential area so this project can be placed. And of course, natural beauty. If Mr. Porter showed this picture that you can see it, it's not, I beg the day for it. If there's a place in Antigonish County, people stop car and take a picture. It's straight to the harbor. That's probably the most beautiful place of the country. Most of common property, that harbor is ours. It belongs to all of us. We are using some frequently, some less frequently, but once we lease these 22 acres or hectares to private business, well, it's not to our use anymore. And well, I will press anyways.
And I'm afraid we're,
My concern
if we could sum up to our 10 minutes now, thank you.
is it quickly.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Sorry, did we have the other presentation? Did you want to come up?
I wasn't getting standing, so I'm bringing.
You have standing. They were sent to me and they went to the committee, so if you wish to do that, you can.
I didn't bring, sorry.
Okay, because your presentation is on the computer. Okay. Okay, well, in that case, what we have then is, the floor is now open. We have a microphone there. And anybody have any questions or concerns that they want to make? This is the time to do that now. And sorry, if we could have your name as well, please.
Sure, my name is Hugh McKay. My question is to Mr. Porter. We just heard the Friends of Amish Harbor speak on the water depth concern that they have. I'm wondering if you could address that.
Thank you, Hugh, for that question. Lou and Peter showed a graph or a picture of a harbor chart with an overlay of our lease area, proposed lease area. And those charts, I couldn't see the date on it, but they're subject to change. The siting of our lease area was done by soundings, not the chart. So we went out with a GPS and located the areas where at low tide there was a minimum of 3 feet of water. That's the minimum we need to use our bobber growth system. And we worked from 3 feet into deeper water. So there was an inaccuracy with what you saw on the slide, maybe just due to an outdated chart. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Do we have anybody else who would like to speak or ask questions? And if we could have your name as well, please.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Elsa, and I'm a resident of 𝐻𝐭𝐤𝐴. I have been my whole life. I would like to know, a couple years ago, as you all know, we had Hurricane Dorian. And a lot of the contraptions, I'm going to just call them contraptions, from the oyster farm in Sheet Harbor, a lot of them went into the ocean. They explicitly said on the CBC article that they expected government assistance to help with that cleanup and to recover. I would like to know why it is the responsibility of the taxpayer. And I would like to know what you would do, what do you think of that if there were to be a hurricane or some kind of other environmental issue that puts all of that stuff into the water, because we know we have a lot of garbage floating around within the ocean and the harbor and water systems. So, like I said, why is it the responsibility of the taxpayer? Thank you.
I didn't get her name.
Thank you, Elsa.
Also.
I think you're referring to the Sober Island farm. I'm aware that they had some significant storm damage one time. A couple of things I'd like to point out. We won't be using the same equipment that they had on their farm. Our bobber growth unit is designed, it floats horizontally like this. It has two static lines holding it, not one. So already we've designed in a reasonable safety factor. It's unlikely that both mooring ropes would break at the same time. But also, and maybe even more significantly, the equipment that went loose in that storm is large rectangular oyster grow units that present a lot of drag and a lot of wind exposure. Ours is a cylindrical unit that is only sticking out of the water about 2 inches, so virtually no wind effect. And waves will roll around the cylinder far easier than a rectangular box. So we believe for those reasons, ours will experience less storm loss, but still certainly possibly some. Another factor to consider is that we designed the bobber growth system, which is a mechanized system, not the manually operated one that was in use at Sober Island. Ours has a machine that operates this that makes it far more efficient to manipulate the machine, including sinking in the fall, raising in the spring, or the same operation for storm avoidance. So it is possible with our system to avoid major storm events. That's not answering your question. You were asking about why would the government pay to clean it up? I have no idea why the government would do that. There is a bond program in place through the Aquaculture Association that every oyster aquaculture operator should be involved with. We certainly will be. And those bonds are in place to protect against the kind of event that you say happened there. I'm not familiar with how that situation was cleaned up. I accept that you're saying the right thing, that it was the government. I can't explain that. We will be involved, if approved, in the Aquaculture Association bond program. So if for some reason Town Point Oysters is not around to deal with the problem, the bonds will be. Does that help you?
Well, it's still not really answering my question if you will expect government assistance.
We won't,
Taxpayer
no,
money.
no. Okay, that was the question.
Yeah.
I thought you were asking me why the government would be involved. No, we won't be expecting the government to look after our problems.
Is the viewing and the availability and access of the Antigonish Harbor for everybody worth this endeavor? Because right now we have unencumbered access to the harbor, and like it was said by the Friends of Antigonish Harbor, it is a common place for everyone. So I can't understand how this is worth it, why this is worth it.
Okay.
When
Well,
we have wild oysters within the harbor already, when there's other places that are doing oysters or harvesting oysters within Antigonish County.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I just can't.
Okay.
relate to-
would you like me to
that.
respond?
It doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion and their own points of view, and I respect yours. If if as a society, we don't take some chances, if every time you want to do something and there is some reason not to do it, and we therefore do nothing, then we don't make much progress. Our government, who we are of the interest in preserving natural beauty and in preserving recreational space, and it's their job to weigh the benefits and the costs and make a decision that's in the best interest of all of us. Ray Ivany, in his report, implored Nova Scotians to invest in coastal and rural communities. 5 of his recommendations deal with aquaculture. And he's imploring us, if we're going to change the negative trends in this province, we have to engage the resources that we have to the benefit of all of us. So yes, I agree. It isn't ideal. There's a beautiful harbor there that today has no oyster farm. And as David Garbery said, a lot of people's preference would be that it stay that way. But as a province that's struggling economically, and as young people who would like to have jobs and stay in this community, there has to be a balance. And it's up to our government to hear all sides and make a decision that's in the best interest for all of us. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
On that note, I was wondering how many permanent or part-time jobs will this project bring to the community apart from your family? Like, I mean, including processing, whatever, I'm just curious. Thank
Do you want to answer that?
you.
Yep, sorry, and your name was?
What?
And your name was?
I'm sorry, I'm deaf.
Oh, your name?
Anna, is correct.
Okay,
Oh, sorry, I didn't say that.
right. Ernie, did you want to mention? But I think the one thing is to keep in mind, it's not just the direct number of people who are working on the oyster farm. It's also all of the businesses in the Antigonish area that would have to provide support for this business as well. So it's not just, I'm just saying that because this is kind of my background in government. You don't look at just the exact numbers on, this operation, but the spin-off effects for this community.
Well, that's what I'm curious about. What is the spin-off? As well as how many people would be working.
Okay. Can you respond to that one? The number of spin-offs? Or
I can say something. I can't give
Okay,
exact
but-
numbers.
yeah, I think that's one of those things. It's difficult to say, but there's a whole not only the production of the bobbers, but it's also providing, electricians, landscapers, construction workers. There's a lot of people that are involved in this. So,
Transportation.
Thanks, Anna. In our application, which I expect you've read thoroughly, what we say and we believe is that when the farm, if approved and is fully operational, will employ 10 people. Some of those will be our family. And it's yet to be known how many of our family stick with this. I hope 3 of them at least. But that, whether they're family or my family or someone else's family doesn't change the fact that it's a job in this community and some person who wants to work and live here gets to stay here. this business, which is not really part of what we're talking about, but that's not included in those 10 jobs. And it's my hope that the farm is approved so that then we can have this business here as well, and it's more significant than the farm. The injection molded parts would be made at Abco Plastics in Lunenburg, but that just gives us the three components, three of the components of the bobber growth system, and then there's the float and other parts. But clients who want to buy this system may purchase it as components and do their own assembly, or they may want it pre-assembled. They may want all of the infrastructure provided, including the machine that operates this system. We will need to have some warehousing, some assembly space, sales and marketing, accounting, lots of different parts with this. And we would like to have it here in 𝐼𝐴𝐴𝐻. Not this, no. Well, I shouldn't say that. Until we get rolling, we may have some of that operation in our barn. But it's, this business is potentially way, requires different facilities than we have. So, no. Does that help you? Okay, thank you.
Just a point of information, in all Nova Scotia, all of Nova Scotia.
Sorry, can't hear you.
I don't know how to turn the mic on.
Yeah, why do you say that? There you go.
No, it's on now. Should you just walk over that one, I guess? Or...
Oh, that's mine.
Thank you. Lou's voice is giving him trouble this evening. I think the point he was going to make was an observation that for the shellfish industry in Nova Scotia, per the Department of Nova Scotia Fisheries and Aquaculture statistics, for 2019, the most recent year that data is available, there were 91 full-time jobs and 120 part-time jobs and that was covering approximately, as I recall, 5,900 hectares of lease space. If the ratio of water surface to employees, this would infer somewhere around 2 employees for the Town Point oyster operation. So many of us who've been studying the application can't come up with the same numbers as to how it comes to 10 or 11 employees in the face of big productivity improvements when the industry in general seems to be operating more efficiently already.
Peter, thanks for the question. If you know the 2 guys who can run a 90-acre oyster farm by themselves, I want to meet them. I have 2 jobs for them. You are suggesting that we are falsely inflating the employment numbers, and we are not. There's no point in doing that. There's nothing to be gained by being dishonest. So that's not what we're doing. But I would like to meet those 2 guys.
Or women.
Hello, my name is Robert McNeil.
I just wanted to ask a question or a series of questions. How many species of oyster are there in Etiquette Harbor?
I feel like that'd be a garbage question.
How many species of oyster? One?
Species of oysters? Yeah. Well, there's only, sorry, how many species of oysters
Yeah,
are?
species or subspecies, yes.
In Aniganich Harbor or?
Okay.
That grows naturally in the harbor.
How many are in the harbor now?
Yes.
Varieties.
Where are they?
How many varieties of oysters are there in Aniganich Harbor?
Okay, and is that the variety or species that's going to be farmed?
Yes.
Okay, so is there a commitment not to bring in oysters
Yes.
from other
Well,
areas?
that's not my commitment.
I
This
know,
is the
but
commitment
perhaps
of Town
Mr.
Point Oysters, that
May I
they
hear
are
it?
going to grow oysters that occur in the
May I hear
harbor.
it from Mr. Porter, please?
We have applied to grow only the species of oysters native to Aniganich Harbor.
Okay,
If we want to grow something else, like clams or quahogs, bay scallops, or a different species of oysters, we have to apply for that license, and Fisheries and Oceans has to review it and provide the license. We haven't applied for that.
is that part of your long-term plan?
Not at this time. Other farmers grow quahogs, bay scallops. Robin Stewart could answer better about whether there are other species of oysters grown. We have no interest in other species of oysters. Some people have tried to grow European oysters here, and it didn't work. I don't know about the Pacific oyster. I haven't heard of any. Robin, are you familiar?
Yeah, no, there's no Pacific oysters in Eastern Canada.
Right?
My understanding is that there are some farms in eastern US that grow oysters from outside North American waters. My concern would be that there could be hybridization and thus loss of biodiversity. So that's where my question is coming from.
We have no interest in other species of oysters.
Hello, I'm a CFA. I come from New Britain. Robin Stewart. I've been working with oysters for 50 years, so I guess it's a part of my life, I guess. So there's only one species of oyster that grows here. They've tried growing the Ostrea edulis, the flat oyster from Europe, and it has some difficulty in the winters, surviving the winters here. A number of people have tried, it's never been very successful. At one time, you may be aware of the disease that wiped out the wild stock in the Labrador Lakes 16 years ago, MSX. Well, there was some discussion about introducing some of the farmers wanting to introduce oyster species from outside the lakes, and that was absolutely shut down very quickly because the First Nations were involved. They didn't want to see that happen. And they didn't want to introduce another form of disease either in the harbor after the experience they had gone through with the native oysters. So, no, as far as oysters go, there's only one species that is grown, and it's a fantastic species. It's probably the most toughest animal on the planet, and it's extremely hardy. It's extremely, probably we're lucky because we live in an area with cold water where it could be stored for up to 6 months out of the water. There's nowhere else on the earth you can do that. We're very lucky to have the waters of Nova Scotia to grow the oyster. And I see a huge potential in the growth of this, if it's cognizant of the communities in which they're going to grow them. I have one comment, David. You mentioned something rather nasty about mussels. I didn't take that very well. Mussels is another bivalve, which is also a filter feeder like oysters. And yes, perhaps they don't have the romance, perhaps, of the oyster, but I live in Cape Breton, where there's a fairly large mussel farm, largest in North America, actually. And there was I participated in this community liaison committee with the community at large that had concerns about that farm, and it's been 16 years, and it's an extremely good organization of input from both sides, from the community at large and the farmers, and they work very closely together, keep each other informed. There's a lot of misinformation at the start. I wouldn't want to go on about how that started. In the early years, everybody was very, very concerned about the impact of the shellfish on the lobsters. And as it turns out, the lobster population of that harbor is tripled in the last 16 years since the mussels have grown there. So there's a lot of positive things too that will come out of this eventually. I think everybody has to work together, and that's the whole idea behind the CLC. It's a community-based organization that has inputs from all components. And this is a good start here to see this happening. Anyway, anybody who wants any questions about oysters, you let me know, because I guess I spent too much of my life.
What's your employment profile in your farm?
I don't have a farm. I don't have a farm. I'm a biologist. I've been working with, I have farmed oysters in the past. I've worked with DFO and stock assessments and stock enhancement for oysters. Yeah, it's different capacities. I don't have a farm presently, no.
So you work for the government, basically?
No, I don't. I work for myself.
As a consultant?
Yes. Anyway, feel free if you have any questions on this.
Do you have any other questions or comments? Yes, your name, please.
Sure. I'm just wondering, when you're up and if Mr. Porter gets approval and you're up and running, what will it look like on where when the oysters come out from being fished and the nursery, like the extra traffic on the 𝐶 territory, the harbor road, the infrastructure for the business? Can you describe that, what we should expect to see?
Thank you, Barb. I don't know you, but do you live on Seabright Road somewhere?
No, I live on the harbor road though.
Okay. The farm operation, we have committed to and offered this to the opposition group that we will not be operating on a retail basis from our property on Town Point. So the traffic serving the farm will be employees, so daily commute, occasional, hopefully only occasional regulator coming to check on us. Infrequent supplies, and occasional shipments. So on a daily basis, something like 6 or 8 commutes for staff. On a weekly basis, likely a supply and a shipment, and however often the regulators are there. The question of when the oysters are harvested, where will they be packaged and stored and then shipped? That question's not been answered yet. We're not going to spend time figuring out that part of the puzzle of how to best build this farm until we're approved. And the reason is we hope to process or cleanse the oysters through deparation rather than relay. There's 2 options. We could take oysters as they're harvested and transport them to another lease, maybe in Marigamish Harbor, where the water is classified as open. Sink them there for 3 weeks, and then go get them again and take them to a packaging facility and then to market. To us, that pushes back on our sustainability goals. We don't want to include in our farm plan all of that transportation or having work crews distant from the farm site. We would much rather take our product to market through a process called deparation. And Joe Boudreau of BioNovations has the technology to help us with that facility. Where will that facility be located? We are looking for a suitable site, and we committed to the opposition group that we would look for sites other than our property, and we've been doing that. Part of the answer to where the deparation facility would be located depends on a few things. How many other farms might participate in the use of that facility? Where are those farms located? There is an indication that in the near future, CFIA will cease accepting relay as an accepted food safety means of taking shellfish to market, and only deparation will be approved. If that's the case, then someone, and maybe us, will build a regional facility for deparation that can serve a whole portion of the province. If that happens, that facility needs to be centralized somewhere. So for all those reasons, we're not dealing with that question until after approved, and then we can start discussions with other farmers and other interested parties in use of this facility. That help? Yep. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul McGilvery. I'm just looking to understand a bit better a couple of the concerns. First one, visual profile, and the second one, the water depth. So in one of the early presentations, there was a photo or video showing 4 floats in the foreground and then a large number of floats further off in the distance. And just wondering, that view kind of looked like the floats in the background were hardly visible. Wondered, like, if that video was taken from the other direction, what would it look like? Would the 4 floats be very evident from the same distance? So just trying to understand a bit that visual. And in particular, wondering about how high the floats, the traditional versus the example here, or rise above the surface of the water. So that was the first question. And the second question was just in water depth. One of the presentations earlier noted that the water depths in the harbor in the proposed sites are 1 to 6 feet. And I think the response was that through soundings, the water depth was found to be 3 feet and higher. So I'm just wondering if there is an inconsistency between the 1 to 6 feet from the charts and the soundings.
Hey, Ernie. Oh.
Well, I can answer the first part of your question from personal experience. We do a lot of kayaking, my partner and I, and we've seen the 2 different types of cages. Out in New Brunswick, where we were originally, if you paddle around Shediac Island, you'll see big blocks of those cages, and they are very visible, especially when they turn them the other way around, and they usually also have cormorants on them, and they're actually quite smelly. So when Ernie came to us, we're a neighbor of his, and when he came to us and asked us how we felt about this, and he explained this bobber thing, I mean, we were puzzled, but it sounded interesting. And then he told us that his partner, Miragamish Harbor, has a few of these as an experimental process. So one day we decided with some friends to go and find them and look at them. And they are, in fact, significantly lower. You have to be quite close to see them. So they are definitely less visible than the common ones that you see normally. That's all I can tell you. As for the second part, I don't know.
Just on the visual, like, can you give me some sense of how high above the surface of the water the traditional versus the other boats are?
He's asking
And,
how high.
and in particular, I think you're describing the sea level view, which is important. I'm also wondering about kind of the higher level view when you drive. As I drove in here tonight, looking down Antigonish Harbor, it's a beautiful sight. I'm just wondering, based on that video we saw earlier, I'm left with the impression you wouldn't be able to see any floats from a distance, say, of half a mile. And I'm wondering if that's accurate or not.
I haven't seen them from what you're saying, so I really don't know. But from the ones that I saw, you had to be you had to be close to see them. And I mean, what you did see from a distance was a line. You see a black line, but it's significantly less than the current system that is used now. I can tell you that, that's for sure.
So you'd like some dimensions?
See, all I'm looking for is something very basic. If I look at this table and the height of that table above the floor, I can get a sense of what things look like in the harbor. What I wasn't getting a sense of from the video was that I don't know where the camera was, where the four floats were, what's the distance between those 2 points, and then the hundreds of floats that are further on.
Sure.
So it's all kind of important in terms of getting an understanding of the perspective.
Yep. Okay, first, the dimensions of the commonly used equipment. The floats are about this tall. So from the water to the top of the float, that high. The floats are pairs of them, 3 feet long, and they're 6 inches wide. So that in grow mode, that's what you see. 2 3-foot-long floats sticking out of the water that high. In defoul mode, you can double that, and you're looking at a rectangular box 3 feet by 4 feet that's supported on top of these floats. So that's defoul mode. Usually they're the other way around with the floats up. With bobber, you're seeing that, an inch or 2 out of the water. And it's curved, shaped like a wave, colored like a wave, and blending in with the wave pattern on the surface of the water. Not invisible, certainly. You'll see a pattern, and the video you were asking about, how close were we? I wasn't there that day. Oh, Robin has pictures.
Ernie, our website also has photos.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying you could direct the crowd to
Sure.
go look at the website.
Sure. Yeah, if you can visit the Town Point Oysters website, there are pictures on there. Robin is very familiar. Do you want to add anything to that, Robin?
No, the lowest profile, I'm sorry. I haven't seen in all my years, I haven't seen any form of oyster farming mechanism that's lower profile than the bobber, that's for sure. Yeah. It's compared to, say, the mussel farm in our bay, the black poach there, PEI, we've got a lot of the oyster grow and different types. It's certainly the least of all of them. So I don't know about distance-wise, how far you have to go away not to see them. Probably a kilometer would probably be not visible, I would say.
Yeah, I guess just the other question was on the water depth. I didn't know if there was an inconsistency between the presentation that said water depths of 1 to 6 feet and the response. You were able to clarify that as well?
Sure. The opponents slide showed our proposed lease location overlaid on a chart. And they were saying the chart depth indicated 1 foot at the shallowest. We didn't use a chart, we did soundings. So we found where the water was 3 feet deep and started from there and went out to deeper water. So I'm only assuming that there's an inaccuracy with the chart or with the placement of their.
Excuse me,
So on the lower end, you started at 3 feet. At the deepest, did you go beyond 6 feet? And
The deepest site on any of the 3 leases was 9 feet. The deepest location. Does that answer your question?
yeah, and I'm just trying to get a sense. So we've got a low point of 3 feet, a high point of 9. Sort of, what would the average depth be within a site, do you think?
We didn't check that, but likely in the 5 foot range.
Okay.
5 or 6,
Thank you.
something like that.
I can add some.
Do you want?
Well, I know charts.
Again, as a kayaker, we do use charts a lot, and you're in fact both right. The chart says from here to here, it can be anything between 1 to 6 feet. I mean, they use, and they go from low tide. That's where they start. So if you found an area that was 3 feet and deeper, well, that would be in that zone because that's where it is, that's where it's delineated.
Pat McDonald. I'd like to extend an invitation to anybody on the community liaison committee to come out and measure the depths of the lease in between Captain's Island and Town Point. I'll take you out there at low tide. The numbers are wrong. I'd also like to ask Ernie why in his application twice he said that there was no personal navigation aid buoys out in the harbor. We talked about it at last meeting, and you talked about it on CBC, where you slandered my kids.
Was your question about buoys or about navigational routes?
Can answer.
You can't answer it if you don't know what he was asking.
no,
I don't know what he was asking.
so we're not quite sure what you're referring to. Navigational buoys put out.
Yes. For.
Are these ones you're referring to by the Coast Guard or?
No, these are personal navigational aid buoys that Transport Canada asks you to set out if you have a certain channel that you like to use. Ernie, in his first meeting, public meeting, he said he wouldn't use anybody's channels, he wouldn't put any oyster cages in any channels. So I marked the channel. Ernie, you know what I'm talking about. Answer.
Well, sorry, you're referring to some buoys that you put out
Yes.
in the harbor,
Yes.
but they're not recognized by
I,
Transport Canada or the
Yes.
harbor master.
I gave all the locations to Transport Canada.
But they do not recognize those.
And Transport Canada gave the coordinates and the depths that I recorded to Nova Scotia Department of Fisheries and Agriculture.
I think if you look at, on the CLC website, that issue was raised and we did contact, the harbor master, and they were aware of, some of the things that have been done in the harbor. But it's not a recognized channel, as it were, by them.
We've been using it forever. That's how you
Sorry,
get.
sorry, see, you're confusing, you're trying to say that, the harbor master has okayed those, but they have nothing to do with those. This is something personal that you've put out, or
Yes.
somebody else has put out.
Well, I put them out there, yes, for a neighbor who has a registered dog in 𝐬𝐳.
I'm just trying to make sure everybody understands.
In your
When you
application,
when you have oysters put out by the harbor master, they have official status.
who's the harbor master?
The Navigational Protection Program.
Who's the harbor master?
That would be with the federal government.
Well, I informed the federal government, Transport Canada, that I put these buoys out there.
But they're not recognized officially. That's my point.
What does that mean?
They're not recognized.
Well, it is, I'm marking the harbor where it's necessary to use to get a sailboat into that location. And they were 4.2 feet deep at low tide when I put them out there. So in between those buoys and Captain's Island, it gets shallower. How can the Community Liaison Committee verify what is right? I'll take you out.
That is not the Community Liaison Committee's job, nor is it Town Point Oyster's job. It is the job of the Navigable Protection Program, which is a program of Transport Canada. That is for the federal government to decide, not for you, not for the CLC, and not for us.
And that's the reason I'm trying to pay. Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Oh, sorry, this lady, you just had her hand.
I wasn't thinking I was going to speak tonight. My name is Charlene LeBlanc. I'm from the municipality of 𝐴rgall on the far end of the province near Yarmouth. And we are building a business park on the sea since 2016. The municipality, I'm the lead on the project. It's called an aquaculture development area for shellfish and marine plants. It will be the first in Canada when it gets approved by cabinet. Getting somebody to invest in oysters is a hard job. People weren't knocking down my door. I'm the economic development officer, as I said, and we created the opportunity to build pre-approved sites for oyster and for marine plants, and we've had some uptake from fishermen. And it's only natural that the fishermen would be the ones to apply. They're concerned about the water. They have the know-how. Some of the charts are wrong, they told us. I have a chart in my garage where the fishermen come and give us the input where we could fit oysters. 𝐿𝐴 Harbor, like David Garber said, some harbors aren't that great, but 𝐿𝐴 Harbor is one of them that has a lot of stuff going on in there. And we have 3 fishermen interested in putting oysters in there. So like I said, it's an expensive venture. The return on investment takes a long time. And I wish 𝐿𝐴 Harbor had more friends that were willing to put oysters in our waters.
Oh, sorry, the gentleman behind you, it's next.
My name is Jordan Parody. Many of you probably don't know me, but I just bought 2 properties down in Harbor Center. I have purchased a piece of land from Leo and Kate Cameron, and I just recently bought Harris Island. I just have a few questions I'd like to have addressed. The first is, you say it's going to be a sustainable family business. I've run a very large scale 200+ employee company for over 10 years in the pharmacy industry. And my question is it going to be a potential for a slippery slope? I have no problem with a small, sustainable, basically low profile, aesthetically pleasing oyster farm. But my concern is the potential for it to be a slippery slope and grow down the road. And what sometimes starts as a small independent family business can be then quickly sold out for a profit to a large scale corporation. And that's a big concern of mine, because a lot of them can line the pocketbooks of political individuals and have things further grow, and things get accelerated very quickly and things can get out of control. So I guess what's to protect it from being a slippery slope, or what do you have in place for the longevity for maybe a 5, 10, 15-year plan going forward? I have just generally curious about whether there will be any odor with these traps in the harbor. The soundings that you did, I'm curious to know whether they were at low, medium, or high tide, which would probably answer a lot of the discussion earlier to know if they were taken at high, low, or medium. And the last thing is, let me just see my notes here. The perception for the video that was talked about earlier, I'm just wondering if there's a particular reason when trying to show, because if I was trying to demonstrate from an aerial shot the profile of a rectangular traditional buoy and your new system, why would you not show them side by side for perception, to show true perception? Is there a particular reason for that? And just if you could answer some questions, that'd be great. Thank you.
Answer to that real quick. There are side-by-side images on our website available publicly. Yep.
Thank you, and welcome to the neighborhood. I'm not sure that I can remember all of your questions, but the slippery slope one, and some other people have asked a similar question about, are we just going through this to sell the lease once it's approved? No, we're not. Here are my 2 sons. They asked me to do this. I probably wouldn't have done it for anybody else. Then the reason they asked me to do it is because they want an opportunity to live and work in Aniganish, and there's no job here for them. They like being on the water. They want to participate in a family business. And our vision is that this enterprise, if it's approved, allows them to live in Aniganish, family to be together, and them to enjoy the challenges and rewards associated with running a small business. None of this vision relates to selling it to a big corporation. Also on the slippery slope, you might have been wondering, okay, once we're in there, are we just going to expand it? No, I'm not doing this again. I've already told everybody that. In order to expand it, I have to start at the beginning again and try to convince all of you people that it's a good idea to make the oyster farm larger. No thanks. So does that answer your slippery slope question? Okay. Smell. That's another good thing. I'm glad you raised that. The current technology available in the industry is the large box with the floats. In the picture, in the four floats in the picture, in the foreground of that. Those cages are plagued with a number of challenges. One of them is they're perfect roosts for cormorants and any other seabird that's tired of flying. They sit on those floats because they're high and dry, very stable, buoyant, and they have a good view all around, so they feel safe there. And while they're sitting there, they're doing their business there. And that's why those floats, which are actually black, look in the picture as though they're white. And Mark said, and this is true, they can be rather smelly. Our system is specifically designed to mitigate that problem. It's held at the water surface with our proprietary bobber float. And this is designed to provide the right amount of buoyancy to have this cage float almost neutrally buoyant. So it's only protruding from the water an inch or 2. Cormorants aren't the most agile birds in the world. They're kind of clumsy. And when they try to land on something that's round and unstable and not very buoyant, they don't like it because they fall off or they get wet. So the bird roosting problem is much reduced with bobber compared to the common technology in the industry. So if they're not roosting there, they're not doing their business there. And the chance of it being smelly is way lower. I still wouldn't go out and stick my nose on one, but probably not like the oyster technology currently available. What questions of yours did I miss?
I think there's only one, and the only question that was missed was whether the soundings were taken at high tide, low tide.
Oh, right. We tried our best to do them at low tide, but please understand that we're out there for hours and hours at a time trying to lay out things, and the tide is only low for 2 hours. So was it at dead low tide? Was it a low spring tide? I doubt it. Was it high tide? No. We believe our soundings are accurate, and even if they weren't, if there's a portion of that lease area that's less than 3 feet in depth, we can't use it. It's not usable by us. So if Pat is right, the area that's less than 3 feet won't have any bobber growth units on it. It's that simple.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, let's ask if there's anybody else who has any other questions or comments. Floor is yours.
Just one comment. I would like to thank you, Mrs. Woodmore, for what you said, because you mentioned something which we always in Friends of Antigonish Harbour believe, that pre-approved areas for aquaculture in Nova Scotia are absolutely essential. If the government departments would pre-approve areas, Antigonish Harbour or somewhere else, and said, this is right, if they would talk to the community and community would accept it, we wouldn't have to be here. And Ernie wouldn't have to do what he's doing now. We would know that this is a place to do business. Then you could have industrial park like you are talking about, and everything is done right and properly. It does not divide communities. Maybe we pull communities together. Thank you.
Bravo, Lou. I wish they had done that, and then we wouldn't be at odds with one another.
We had plenty fights, by the way.
The-
Plenty fights, by the way.
Yeah. Charlene has done a fantastic job, but it wasn't our provincial government that hired her to do it. It was the District of Argyll. You are correct that the provincial government said they were going to do this to create aquaculture development areas, but they haven't done it. Is that a big surprise? Probably not. It has been challenging for everyone involved in this to face the different perspectives and get there without being uncivil and dishonest and definitely unfriendly. So I wish the government had gotten to this task before I had to. And thank you, Lou, for bringing that up.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Going twice. Do we have any questions or comments? And for the proverbial third time, any questions or comments? If that's the case, I'd like to thank everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It's been actually a pleasure going through all of this information. And as I said, what the minutes from this meeting will be on the CLC website and Facebook page. And hopefully we'll be providing a little bit more information on some of the questions that came up, providing a little more detail. And on that note, I would like to thank everybody for coming out and have a good evening. Thank you.